So we're doing the what is Jesus doing? And today I had multiple titles. I didn't know what to call it. There's a few that I wanted to call it Jesus is spanking. Should I kept it that way? That would have been a little bit more catchy. Like what is going on? Jesus is spanking. Yeah, I was like, then I was like, oh, Jesus is punishing. That's another one that I wanted to do. And then there's a Jesus is disciplining, right? Jesus is correcting. Man, who is so blessed right now already by that title? These titles, they're so good, right? Yeah, we'll put them all on there. Whatever you want to do, like, well, everybody likes those. But we're gonna read. We're gonna go through Hebrews. So actually, I was preparing for one message, and then I was like, wow, there's just too much, and I got to do it in two parts. So we're gonna do this part today, and then next Sunday it'll be a little bit more encouraging than today. This today, hold on to your seats. Anybody got seatbelts with? Put the seatbelts on. But anyway, so this is part one. Basically, it's going to be kind of tied together for next Sunday because next Sunday is our communion Sunday, right? We're going to do. So I want to do a really exciting topic on communion and about the blood. All right, it's going to get real bloody next time. Okay, we're going to actually practice some bloody things. All right, it's going to be bloody good. But anyway, we'll even start talking about that. But anyway, it's going to be really good. So it's going to be fun. But anyway, so I'm going to read. This is a portion of scripture that has flipped and caused a lot of messed up teaching in a lot of places. So I'm like reading this, and I'm like just like, wow. I already had some sort of conclusion of what this was all about. I already had kind of an idea. I already had like I was like found like, wow, this is not what I thought it was. But the more I was reading it, I'm like, it's just getting better. It's just, wow. It's like people are trying to teach me going the other way, but every time I read it, it just gets better the other way. You know, they people they want the idea that God is really one way, but then you go read the Bible because they're using verses, and then I read it more, and then I'm like, actually, I'm getting a even more other idea of God, who God is. Wow, it's having a counter effect on me. So Hebrews chapter 12 is this is quite interesting. You have to remember it's after Hebrews chapter 11. After 11, so everybody kind of is very familiar with chapter 11, right? But anyway, so we're going to read starting at verse 4 and 5. And it says, "You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons." And it says, "My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives." So does this mean that all the daughters are excluded from getting spanked? It just says son there all the time, right? So women, you guys are you're good. You're safe. You're not part of this. Right? If they teach that God is the one punishing you, God is the one spanking you, right? Because he loves you as children, right? But it just no, I'm just inserting that as a joke. But anyway, that's not true. So what is this verse here is often been used like, man, God spanks you. So what are some ideas? How does God spank? What's some of the ideas floating in the world right now that God spanks or corrects or scourges or disciplines? What is a general thought? Maybe what you did think or what maybe you still think. What are some things? Throw me some ideas. What are they? Hurricanes. Wow, that's a pretty aggressive spanking. A death of a loved one. That's a heavy spank too. How big is that belt? Yeah. Health problems. Your washing machine breaks. That's what is that? What is that one? Like the little tap on the hand versus the hurricane? First, I gotta tap you on the hand, and it just gets, and then I'll kill one loved one, and all of a sudden, I'll just bring a hurricane and kill everyone, right around you, right? So the ones that survived, they're the ones getting spanked, and then what about the ones that died? They were just collateral damage. Is that what it is? Any other thoughts? Something it's always something that the idea of it's some sort of pain and discomfort, right? Right, because disciplining always seems to be uncomfortable. That's the idea. That's the first thought that most people have here, right? And I think it's just because why do most people think it's some sort of discomfort and stuff? Why do you think? What's the idea? Why does it come from that mentality? Anybody? result of the flesh. Did anybody ever get spanked when you were a kid? Yeah, anybody want to admit to that one? Did anybody spank their own kids? Anybody want to admit? Ooh, watch out! Camera's not turned at you guys. You know, I wonder if it's because the way we grew up and what happened to us, and therefore we translated into what we assume right away. This is what it's talking about. Well, he's talking about a father and a child. Like, oh, I want to teach the child, I want to correct the child, and therefore we just translate, well, how did our parents correct us, right? What is the thing that stuck very closely the most to us as how our parents corrected us, right? That was usually related to punishment, right? Like when we read this, because we think why do we have to assume right away it's something that's discomforting or something that's uncomfortable or something that's related to pain? Like is God like that? Is that the only way He can do it? Anyway, it's just good questions. I'm just asking. All right, it's just to get our wheels spinning. So let's go to verse 9. And isn't it true that we respect our earthly fathers even though they've corrected and disciplined us? Then we should demonstrate an even greater respect for God, our spiritual Father, as we submit to His life-giving discipline. So we respect our parents because they were teaching us, right? Notice how it says, even though they corrected and disciplined us. So the word first, right away, we need to translate and get a definition of discipline. What does disciplining really mean? Disciplining is not punishing. Punishing is it's a totally separate thing. When you disobey the law will only punish you. It's not there to teach you or disciple you. They will not go alongside of you during your life and teach you how to live. They will just wait until you break the law and then boom, you put you in jail. There's a punishment. There's a difference, all right? So disciplining is something you go alongside and you teach. Disciples. Did Jesus do something to His disciples that was devastating and hurtful and painful? In a physical way? Did He call fire from heaven and burn people in their life? There you go, guys. I hope you learn your lesson. Even as dumb as they were, even as dumb as Judas Iscariot or even Peter, like rejecting and denying Christ, right? Did Jesus come along and say, your parents or your children are going to die because you need to learn a lesson. You need to stay committed to me. You better not deny me again, so I'm going to teach you the worth of life or who really is worthy to be worshipped because you're too attached to your self-image. That's why you're too self-centered, so I have to hurt you physically, emotionally, mentally, or whatever, so you will finally have a learned lesson. There's no such thing, right? So these were some of the greatest disciples that we still talk about today, 2,000 years later, but yet Jesus didn't demonstrate any sort of whipping and beating in a physical, emotional way. So why are we concluding that that's what it is talking about right away? Right? So anyway, then we should demonstrate an even greater respect to God. Even greater. So he's comparing an earthly father, how earthly parents or whatever teach their discipline or correct their kids. And he says, how much more should we not have respect for our Father in heaven who gives life-giving discipline? Like, which is a higher level, like a way better type of discipline, even though we try to teach our children and I think the way we think is best, but we still fail and do things wrong many times. There's many things I think about back, man, I did that so wrong. I had it so wrong. I didn't see things clearly. I didn't understand what was really going on with my child. I just went according to the moment and just like reacted that way. But instead of sitting back and realizing and knowing their heart versus and also my heart, like there was a miscommunication there. There was a misunderstanding between us, and therefore we react only according to what we understand at the moment, right? And then we're like, wow. And then later on, we're like, maybe I shouldn't have reacted that way because I didn't quite understand. But here, the Father, it says, how much more is God, like, should we respect how He disciplines us? So now think about it. The Father knows your heart perfectly. He knows exactly what you need, what you are, who you are, why you're doing what you're doing. Would he not know exactly what is needed to discipline or to correct or to teach us, right? Now imagine that. If you knew exactly the heart of your child, like even from young on, when they're like beginning to speak, because sometimes we're like, what are they trying to say, right? Because they're trying to get a message to you, but they sometimes don't know the words or how to respond or how to react. They don't know how to deal with the emotions, right? They're still developing in so many ways, right? But here the father knows down to the core of this, like, down to the core of what's going on in your child's heart. And therefore, how much easier would it not be to know how to react then, right? Wouldn't we love to know exactly what's going on in a child's heart? Because sometimes we're like, man, I wonder what's going on in your mind and your heart, because then I would know what to do. So we're like kind of testing the waters, what's going on, and we ask questions and we communicate and we live together. And so, see, that's just some thoughts and some questions that I had. I'm like, there must be something else going on here. He says, our parents corrected us for the short time of our childhood as it seemed good to them, but God corrects us throughout our lives for our own good, giving us an invitation to share his holiness, right? So then people read this, right? So there's like, well, see, you stick to your parents only for a short time. You're only with your parents for a short time, so they teach you as you grow up and then until you move on, right? So that's a small thing. So the general idea is that God will correct you for the rest of your life, your whole life being, right? Because he wants to make you into the image of Jesus. You look like the image of an ugly beast, but Jesus, this beautiful creation, and he's like, man, you got a lot of rough edges. So this whole life through, he's got this big chisel that just, keep breaking things off of your life to try to turn you into more like Jesus. So at what point are you going to be like Jesus? What if you die young as a child? Did they get a chance to become like Jesus? Are they still in heaven now with all the rough edges and the ugly things that people think that God is trying to break off of people? Or what if you didn't have as many challenges in your life like the other person? Somebody once said, I forget who it was, that said that God must have really loved Paul because that's why he suffered so much. God loved Paul so much, so he wanted him to be exactly like, he wanted to really make Paul into a nice image. So he suffered so much and made him. But what about the ones that don't suffer through life? Are they like Jesus? Have they become like Jesus? Have they done up in does God not love them? So people have literally thought they're really desperate for love, right? They really want someone to love them. So they attach themselves to these bad circumstances, the things that happening in their life, or they willingly will walk into situations that will be bad for them, that is actually hurting them. Then they're thinking that, they take comfort in that, thinking that God loves them. That's why they're suffering. It's almost like, what's that syndrome? When somebody gets abused all their life, that they think that that's what love is, right? They think that's what's like, they do this to me because they love me. They hurt me because they'll love me. It's like it's delusional. It's like they're deceived, right? That's how a lot of people, they see God. Like they see that the circumstances they go through their life, that all the bad things happening, meaning that, God loves me so much. Because he says he will discipline the ones that he loves. So the more suffering I have, the more loved I am. Because it's an emotional time. So that they attach that as love, right? But that's not what it is. Because it says God corrects us throughout our lives for our own good, right? For our own good. For our own good. Not his good. For our own good. Not in a sense that the way we translate how parents, like, you look at your child and they're misbehaving, they're really bad, and they want to spank you, and he says, this hurts me more than it hurts you. This is for your own good to do this to you, right? We really want to beat them for their own good. Right? They might not understand it. So it's the same way we translate. We don't understand what God is doing right now, but it's for our own good. At the other side, it will be better for me somewhere. But they never end up to the other side. When? When will we reach to the other side? It's like, at what point are you going to be at that other side? At what point is it going to be good for you? Only when you get to heaven? So does earth suffering have to be so bad for heaven to be that good? Is heaven that standard? Is heaven not that good that you have to suffer more here? Like you can't, there's no way that you can ever experience heaven on earth, really, because what if you, all of a sudden, it's at the end, you're like, God, I don't want to go to heaven because I have it so good here. Like, is that what the idea is? Like, because heaven is painted, maybe we've just only been preaching that heaven is only so good. It's not. What if it's way better? What if heaven on earth, if we had a perfect life, never had any suffering, never anything went wrong here on earth, but we knew that heaven was still better? Don't we think that that is possible? Why? Why does that have to be? Like, why would God do that? Anyway, but he says to share in his holiness. So we're saying that, okay, well, God wants you to be as holy as he is, so that's why he's making you to suffer. So the one question I had the other day was this. When the disciples started to preach after Jesus was gone, went up to be with to sit on the right hand of the Father, right? He had resurrected, he had gone up into the clouds, and gone. And then he sent the Holy Spirit, and then the disciples started to preach boldly, right? And then they're brought forth before the rulers and the authorities and the Pharisees and the deacons and the elders of the church. They got interrogated, got invited out to Darnach to the Thursday meeting, right? And then they're like, okay, so what's going on here? What are you guys doing? You guys are messing up our church services. You're preaching about a Jesus that we don't want to be preaching. And what was the Pharisees' reaction when they heard that the disciples, the people that were unlearned, were so smart? What was their conclusion? Wow. We saw how much you suffered all your life, and that's why you guys are so smart and look like Jesus. Is that what they said? What did they say? He says, we observe that you guys have been with Jesus. They didn't observe that you guys went through some hard times. Your families died. You had sickness, or your businesses went kaput, or you lost a lot, your fridges or your washing machine broke. That's why you've learned a lot of good patience. You've got boldness because you suffered so much through your life. And then they're like, they didn't observe that at all. They didn't recognize, they're like, we recognize that you've been with Jesus. They hung out with Jesus. So what was it like for them to hang out with Jesus? They got fed food when they needed food. They got healed when they got sick. They got raised from the dead when they died. That's what it was. It was heaven on earth living with Jesus. That's why they were like so attached. They were like, wow, we want to be with this man, because everywhere we go, they were like, well, we need money to pay our taxes. And he says, go grab a fish and there'll be a tax money in that fish's mouth. Do anybody else need money to pay the taxes? Go fishing. They observe you've been with Jesus, and they needed to get smart. They needed to they needed to know how to talk to people. They needed to get bold, to get to face the rulers and the problems in their day. They hung out with Jesus because Jesus gave that to them. Notice it wasn't all that. But anyway, so I'm going to keep going. I'm going to read in Proverbs 3, verse 13. It says, joyful is the person who finds wisdom, the one who gains understanding, for wisdom is more profitable than silver, and her wages are better than gold. Not sure if I had the other verse. But wisdom, in the next verses, it says it refers to a person. Wisdom is always referred to a person. Blessed is he that finds her. Like, if you find wisdom, you are blessed. Right? You gain, and it says something about if you live and you have this wisdom, things will go well. You will have wisdom. What was the result of Solomon's wealth and riches? He asked for wisdom. The book of Proverbs is not about a king that got really rich and was very smart. The book of Proverbs, or the book of like Solomon's story, is not a story of him getting so smart and being the one that asked for the right thing, in a sense that he was smart and knew God. But it's a story of a God that gave someone something and caused them to prosper in everything they did. What was it? Wisdom is always referred to as a person. All right? And I'm going to show you this. It says, 1 Corinthians 1 verse 30, it says, God has united you with Christ Jesus. For our benefit, God made him to be wisdom itself. For whose benefit? Who's the beneficiary here? You. You're the beneficiary. For our benefit, God made him to be wisdom itself. Christ made us right with God. He made us pure and holy, and he freed us from sin. So I'm just wondering, Christ caused us to suffer a lot so he could make us pure and holy and to get sin out of your life. Whoa. There's none of that information in there. Christ made us right with God. He made us pure and holy, and he freed us from sin. How many times do you have to get free to be freed? How many times does that happen? Do we have to go to a freedom session every weekend to be free from sin? Because you got free last Sunday. Now this Sunday you got to come back and get free again. It's the same thing. Like you go raise a dead person. Next Sunday you tell them to come back so I can raise you from the dead again. The guy will be like, why? I'm already alive. Right? It's just a little bit backwards. 2 Peter 1 verse 3, it says, for his divine power has bestowed on us, his divine power has bestowed on us absolutely everything necessary for a dynamic spiritual life and godliness through true and personal knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. How? What did it... Through suffering and pain and God spanking you, breaking your washing machine, and bringing all the hurricanes and earthquakes and terrorists blowing up your cities. That's what made you excellent. No. He says, for his divine power has bestowed on us everything. And you read right after this. People, they skip over this verse, but you go right after these verses. Later on, it says that because of this, and then it talks about add faith, add this to this and this and this, right? So people are like, oh yeah, you got to keep adding these things in life. You got to add self-control. On top of that, add this. And on top of that, add perseverance. On top of that, add kindness. But they forget completely what he just said. Because of this. You already have it. It's not in the sense that you need to gain it through your life. You need to keep getting it somehow, like through different problems. You don't learn patience through problems. Problems don't teach you patience. Because then you would have to have a problem all your life to have patience. He says he bestowed everything you need, so he gave you patience so you can deal with the problems. That's why in Peter it says that's why like these things that need to be added, he says when you face these things, they will be there ready for you to use. You don't need enemies to come and hate you in order for you to have love, do you? How did that work? Did Jesus need to have them crucify him for him to love? It says, for God so loved the world that he sent his son. So there was a great opportunity to love. There will be great opportunities for you to be patient. There will be great opportunities to be self-control. But it's not that these things create these things in you. God already bestowed all of those things in you. So when you face these things in the world, you have great opportunity to manifest these things. Because people are so problem-focused and trying to drain out life out of death. You cannot gain something from something that doesn't have it. Right? You can't find the cure for cancer in cancer. Cancer just creates death. So you can't get life out of it, right? You want to get rid of it. You need an outside living source to get rid of it. Your body fights against it. Why would you use the same thing that kills you to try to gain life? That's what Paul said in Romans. The same thing with sin. He says, why would you keep on sinning? Because you're already free. Like that sin won't give you life. It's counterproductive. Right? So anyway, let's keep going. 2 Peter 1:4, and he says, as a result of this, he has given you magnificent promises that are beyond all price, so that through the power of these tremendous promises, we can experience partnership with the divine nature, by which you have escaped the corrupt desires that are of the world. How did you escape the corruption of the world, of the corrupt desires in the world? How does it explain how to, as a result of this, through the power of these precious promises? The power of precious promises. What is the power unto salvation? Can somebody answer me that? What's the power unto salvation? Which the word salvation is not just being saved for heaven. Salvation is being saved from everything. The gospel. Paul says in Romans that the gospel, he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because that is the power unto salvation. The gospel, knowing that's good news, right? So what is the good news? That's what we need to focus on, what the good news is. So we need to go back. What is the book of Hebrews, the whole purpose of the book of Hebrews? What was the whole purpose of it? Right from chapter 1 all the way to the end. What was the whole point of Paul, if he's the author of it, but I believe it is, what was his whole purpose of the book of Hebrews? He introduced a new covenant. They still have old covenant mindset, but he said, you need to know a new covenant, right? You need to keep that in mind. When you read chapter 12, keep that in mind. He's introducing a new covenant. We're trying to read chapter 12 according to the old covenant, which was when they disobeyed, they got punished, and then God said that's how he corrected them, by punishment, right? But he's saying, I'm giving you a new covenant, which was a prophecy in Proverbs chapter 3, where he says he will discipline those he loves. It's a prophecy. It's not even, that wasn't even the way, kind of the thing that he was talking about in the Old Testament. But he says something is coming. It'll be a way that you do not understand. It'll be different than you can actually compare to, right? But he says, we can experience partnership with that divine nature. Your partner, you co-heirs with a divine nature. That's how you escaped it. You do not escape the desires, the evil desires of your heart, like a lot of people believe that their heart is wicked above all things, right? Then I'm wondering, what kind of heart did Jesus give you when he gave you a new heart? Did Jesus give you a wicked heart? He said he would take that heart of stone out of you and give you a heart of flesh, right? What does that mean? It's a new nature, new creation, a living being, not dead. A stone can't create life. A heart of flesh that we have creates life. Have you ever tried to stop your own heart? Have you ever actually sat back and like, I don't want to worry you guys, but you ever sit back and like you're wondering, like, I have absolutely no control of what my heart is doing right now. I'm like, wow, it's got its own mind. It's got its own, it's just like doing stuff. It's pumping. No matter how hard I meditate, I'm telling it to stop pumping. It keeps pumping. I'm like, wow, I'm really trusting that heart is knowing what it's doing, because like my hand, it's doing what I'm telling it to do right now, right? I'm aware of it. But you can sleep, you can do whatever, your heart's just going, keeps going. That's why it compares that life is in the blood, in the heart. Like anyway, I'll keep going. Ephesians 4 verse 13, it says, this will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. So this is another one. Right before this, in Ephesians, it talks about the apostles, the prophets, the teachers. There's like 5 of them. Anyway, it talks about all these different grace gifts to the church. He says these have been given to the church for what? They will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature. So are the teachers supposed to be the ones spanking you? So because it doesn't say that all your problems in your life, and the suffering and the pain, is to bring you into unity of faith. It says the apostles, the teachers, the prophets, and all these things. But what are these gifts, or these gifts to the church? What are they supposed to be doing? What is the main thing they're supposed to be doing? What are they supposed to be doing? Anybody know? Teaching. About what? Revealing something, right? So he says that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to a full and complete standard of Christ. So to a full, complete standard. So it's like, are we trying to become a perfect person? Is that the whole idea? Another translation actually says that you will come to that same like knowledge, or that you will be like actually recognize who Christ is. That's actually what it's talking about. It's not like a full, complete standard of Christ. Like, oh, Jesus was so perfect. Now the teachers, our goal is now to make you as perfect as Jesus was. So that's why we say, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't go watch those movies, don't go to the theater, don't do this, don't do that. Make sure you have lots of babies. Right? That's why we have all these legalistic preachers going on to think, because they're trying to make you into Jesus. This might not be very comfortable right now, but I got to tell you, you're a dirty, rotten sinner. You need to quit doing that, right? Don't dress like that. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't swear. It's just like, that's the idea of how to turn them into Jesus. But that's not the whole point of it. What did we just read? How? How do you get to it? Unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son, that we will be mature in the Lord. How do you become mature in the Lord? By quitting all these different things that people don't like? It says the knowledge of God's Son. What does that mean? The knowledge of Jesus. Then we will no longer be immature like children. We are being taught. We will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth. In the context here, it's actually talking about the people that try to get you into bondage, back into bondage. People teaching you according to, like, with fear to try to get you to behave. But he says, we won't be like that anymore. When will you not be like that anymore? After you've suffered and been spanked enough in your life? When you have the knowledge about by every wind of new teaching, we will not be influenced by people that try to. Because what? Now you're not just heard about someone. Now you know someone. If you know someone and somebody says something about that person that you know, you will give the person that you know the benefit of the doubt, not some other person. Right? You start to act according to the person you know. It's an amazing thing. It's even true in your friend circle. He says, a lot of people say, "Show me your friends, and I'll your closest friends, and I'll tell you what you're like." So if I look at who you guys are, now I know who I'm like. Wow, no pressure, guys, no pressure. I'm just kidding. But it actually is, like, even in the natural realm, like you will, like, the people, the circle that you live with, that you do community with, in a sense. I'm not trying to say that we need to push out people that don't think the way that's not the answer at all right? But just in general, like, someone that in the world, like, when they want to, like, if you want to see how you think, the circle that you live with, you adopt, like, you kind of pick up things and you start to think like-minded, in a sense, right? So if you're so connected with Jesus, you start to think like-minded. Once you know Jesus, you are like-minded. When somebody says something else about the Father, so what was the whole purpose of Jesus? What did Jesus do on this earth? What was he trying to accomplish? Just save you from your sin, and then you just took off and left? Like, we were doomed for hell, and then he says, I'll give you an option to go to heaven, and now the rest of your lives, you got to decide this side or this side, this side or this side, right? So the earth, in the last 2,000 years, has just been deciding which side they want to be on. Is that what it all was about? That wasn't it at all. The focus wasn't even, he was trying to get you off the focus of this side and that side. He was getting you the focus on who the Father was, to reveal the Father, right? So once you know him, you know the Father. Jesus said that. I am in him, and he is in me. If you are in me, you are in him. Like, like he said, there's no difference. As close as I am the Father, as much as I know him, that's how much you know him. Anyway, so let's keep going. In verse 24, and then put on the new self, which is in the likeness of God, has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. Put on the new self. He's trying to get them to understand. He's comparing like the putting on of clothes, right? He says, because of this truth, put on this new self, which is in the likeness. So it's not like an effort type of thing, because you go through Revelation, who's the one that gave you or put on the new garment? Did you put that garment on yourself? He gave you the garment, right? He dresses you. You can't even dress yourself. It says, which is in the likeness of God. Because of this, what we just read, because of what Jesus already did, he says, because of this, and it's already in the likeness of God. So can you, like, that doesn't say anything about, first you got to suffer and have a hard time in life, then you will be able to qualify to fit this new clothing I'm going to give you. We got to do some crazy exercise and, get down to a certain number, then you'll fit. Because Jesus only has one size. What size does Jesus have? You know what? I think he has like XXXXXXXX million XL. Make sure that you're always going to fit. Anyway. But you can also look at it that he has the one size that nobody will fit, but he's like, I will make you fit. He makes you to fit. He cuts off everything that doesn't fit, and then he makes you fit. But it's not in your self-effort or nothing, because he took care of the thing that was making you a different shape. He gave you a new creation, a new person, a whole new being. He's like, okay, like I'll agree. If you say that I'm a dirty, rotten sinner in the sense that I'm bulging out of all kinds of ugly warts and whatnot, and a big nose that needs to go smaller and all that kind of stuff. Like I got all these things, these problems, and then Jesus is like, man, you don't fit me. And then what did he do? On the cross, he broke it all and gave you a new body, a new creation, right? Brand new. Anyway. 2 Peter 2, verse 20, it says, for if, after they have escaped the defilements of the world how do you escape the defilements of the world? By the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Not by getting spanked, not by hurricanes, not by wars, not by broken washing machines or broken cars, not by high tax bills or loss of business or whatever. It says, by the knowledge of the Lord and Savior. That's how you escape the defilements of the world. They are again entangled in them and are overcome. The last state has been worse than the first. He's talking about these people that they escaped the defilements of the world by Jesus, by simply knowing Jesus. But he says they are again entangled in the defilements. How do you go back into defilements? Is to go back to bondage. How do you go back to bondage? Is to go back to the source that gives you bondage. By the law. What did Paul say in Romans and in Galatians? How you get back into bondage. How do you get back into bondage? Which actually creates the defilements of the world. Gives power to the sin of the world. Law. Legalism. Self-effort. Moralism. And are overcome, and the last state has become worse for them than the first. And then it compares to it, they are like dogs that return to their vomit and eat it. They see Christ and they vomit out all the bad. It just comes out, right? And then like, wow, I feel so, it feels good. Like after, it's so uncomfortable vomiting out all that junk, the virus and the disease, whatever that's causing it. And then you're like, oh, wow, it feels so good. Would you want to go back to that you just spit out? Man, that would be so gross. But he compares it to that. It's terrible. Now let's go back to conclusion. We have to go all the way back to Hebrews chapter 1. Hebrews 12:1. Chapter 12, verse 1. It says, therefore, because of this. Now, what was Hebrews 11, the last verse? I think it's verse 40. Hebrews 11, all the way at the end, because it talks about all these heroes of the faith. Abraham, Moses, and the prostitute, and all the different, all these people. It talks about here that they believed God, right? And it was counted unto them as righteous. They believed God. They believed God. And then it uses Israel as an example. It says they entered the promise, but Israel did not enter the promise. Why? Because they did not believe, right? They did not believe. Well, then it says all the way at the bottom, and then it goes back to the people that saved. And he says, there's a lot more that I can talk about. And he says, they suffered even unto death. A lot of them, they suffered for the promise that they did not even see. They believed it, and they were persecuted and killed and cut in half, and so on and so forth, right? And then he says, but they did not enter the perfection. They did not receive the fullness of the promise yet, because they were looking forward to a promise. And then he says, in the very last verse, it says that they will be perfected together with us. They, in the past, will be perfected together with us. They will enter the promise together. They will be perfected at the same time as us. The same time. So all these people in the Old Testament, all the problems, all the crazy things, the punishments and everything, did not perfect them. Even to the point where they were killed and cut in pieces. That was not enough to perfect them. So what was it? He says, since they were waiting for perfection, he says, but they had to wait until we also were going to get perfected, right? He says, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So the first time you read, like generally, the first thought, what is this? This verse that you read? Okay, make sure you don't sin in your life because it'll hinder you from running. That whole word there, he says, let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which lay aside. And it's in a sense that you've been shot with an arrow of sin in your life. And he says, you need to take it out. Get rid of that arrow of sin, right? Let it out. And he says, lay aside every encumbrance, the sin which so easily entangles us. So the sin that it's talking about, what's the sin? What's that arrow that hinders you from running? Anybody would want to run a race when you got an arrow in your chest or in your leg or somewhere in your butt cheek? You wouldn't be able to run very well, right? So what's that arrow what's that sin? He's still in the same context of the chapter before. The sin of what? Unbelief. Not knowing. The sin of not knowing or not believing of what? Not believing what? What was the thing that they were not believing? The promise, right? Well, now we need to go, well, who is the promise? So they have, get rid of that arrow, that unbelief that's causing you not to run. You can't run if you do not believe. The Israelites, they were stuck. They couldn't run the race. They were stuck in a desert. They couldn't get anywhere because they let that arrow of unbelief just stay in there and create bitterness in their heart. Actually, it refers to as it creates bitterness. So easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance, with passion. Endurance there, that whole word is not, man, you got to try so hard, you got to make it to the end, it's so hard in life. It's actually running with passion. Once you believe, passion comes out. Faith has been given to you. The race that so is set before us. What is that race? What does that mean when the race is set before us? All right, let's keep reading. Fixing your eyes on what? On Jesus. So you're fixing your eyes, you're turning, you got rid of that unbelief, that arrow of unbelief, the sin. Now fixing your eyes on Jesus, the promise. The Israelites refused to fix their eyes on their promise. But it talks about the people that did fix their eyes on the promise. It says they died, not coming right to the promise yet, but he says they will be perfected at the same time as us. So now the promise arrived and we have been perfected. Jesus showed up. Now, all of generations before us got perfected at the same time as us because Jesus was the answer. Jesus is the goal, or it was to put our eyes on. It says the author and perfecter of our faith. So who's the one perfecting your faith? Your problems, your broken tools, or your broken car, or Hurricanes. Does hurricane perfect your faith? Tornadoes, earthquakes, wars. Who for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the Father of the throne of God. He endured the cross. Remember that. He endured. You did not endure. You didn't endure nothing, all right? He's the one that was in the garden sweating with blood. What did we read right before in verse 4 and 5? You have not even shed blood. You have not even sweat blood. Why? Jesus endured the cross, despising the shame. He's the one in the garden sweating blood. What does that say? He even dealt with the unbelief. Stress. Stress is a direct part from unbelief. Jesus he struggled and he fought so much to the point of sweating blood, which is a heavy stress. That's why he said, Father, is there any other way? He did it 3 times and he says, not my will, but your will. He was actually fighting, he was destroying that unbelief to the point of bleeding. And he says, you guys have not done it because he did. Jesus did it. He says, for consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary. He endured, so you do not grow weary. It's like enlarge the church is trying to teach us to work harder, run on the treadmill a little harder, pull a little bit more weight, do a little bit more push-ups, jump a little higher, do a little bit more work, try a little harder, because I don't want you to grow weary. But here it says, he endured such hostility by sinners against himself so that you will not grow weary. He set the goal. He's the one that laid the path. He's the one that made the race. He's the author of your faith, so you can run with passion. It's not your problems that create. And that's the whole context of this thing. So he says, you need to learn. I'm teaching you something. You've been trying to run this race with that arrow of unbelief in you. You've been trying to run this race by the law, by moralism, and by trying a little harder, by good deeds. You've been trying to do that by your own good works, your own self-righteousness. But he says, I'm teaching you a new way. I'm disciplining. I'm trying to correct you. You need to run the race the way I created it. I'll put you in there and set you up for life. It's not by your struggle and endurance and God spanking you, trying to make you right. He perfected you so you could run perfectly. It's not your work. It's his work. He endured so you won't grow weary. That's good news. I don't have to try to work hard to not go weary. It's his responsibility for me not to go weary and lose heart. He's committed, fully committed to you not to lose heart. He's committed to that you not to grow weary. Man, he wanted you to just believe. That's why he says, lay aside that sin of unbelief, because he's teaching you, he's correcting you, he's telling you, Jesus is the author and finisher of your faith. Of his faith, of faith. It doesn't even say your faith. He says he's the author and finisher of faith. It's not yours. In a sense that you started with faith, and now he's going to somehow try to build it up and finish it in you. No, he's the author and the finisher of faith, and then he gives you the full thing. He says, run with it. Look unto Jesus. So that's good news. Like when God is no longer spanking you with problems, he's teaching you that I'm not the problem. The world was trying to give you problems, and I'm the solution. I'm the life-giving. He's teaching you Jesus is the way. For a Pharisee in the Old Testament, it would have been very offensive. That's why he says it's uncomfortable for you. They were offended at him for bringing that Jesus is the way. But I worked so hard. I worked all my life to try to become like Jesus. And you're saying that Jesus already made me like Jesus? Wow. That's a good correction, is it not? That's life-giving correction. If you would come to me and say, man, I'm having problems and I need to deal with this. How do I get it? And I just like say, Jesus took your problems. Quit focusing on your problems. Jesus took your problems and nailed them on the cross. He dealt with it. Believe it. Right? That's like, oh wow, that's life giving. But what if I give you this correction and said, hey, I'll be your accountability partner. So I'll call you every day and ask you how you're doing. Make sure you try harder, pray longer, read the Bible more, pray long, like fast and pray. But those are not bad things to do. Praying and reading the Bible is a good thing. But those are not the things that make you into more like Jesus. When I pray and read the Bible, I realize I am a lot more like Jesus than I thought. It's a revealing truth, not a creating one.